Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the discussions. Allow me as well, on behalf of Focus on the Global South, as one of the co-organizers, to thank everyone for joining this side event at HRC 59 to share the findings of a report on transnational landowners and inequality in the case for redistribution. I'm making this short video from the Philippines, where I am based. Allow me to share a few reflections on the main issues outlined in the report from our experiences here in the Philippines. The just distribution of all agricultural lands is a commitment by the Philippine state. It's a commitment enshrined in the Constitution and made operational in the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law and Program, which turned 37 years old last June 10. Almost 4 decades on, however, not only have the targets for land distribution not been fully met, farmers across the country have raised concerns not just about the slow pace of the program completion, but of intensifying landlord resistance, resulting in reversals, with agrarian reform beneficiaries losing control over the land and increasing reprisals against their assertion of their land rights. These attacks against farmers take on many forms. They are branded as terrorists or linked to the communist insurgency. They face criminal cases and all sorts of slap suits, from cyber libel to syndicated estafa. They are deprived of support to make their lands productive, forcing them to accumulate debt and eventually leading them to relinquishing their control over their lands. What's happening in the Philippines is emblematic of the kind of challenges and barriers to advancing our demand for redistributive policies as a pillar in confronting multiple interlocking crises that we are facing today. A situation where, despite the avowed commitment by the state to land distribution through agrarian reform and also the recognition of the right of indigenous peoples to ancestral lands and domains, lands continue to be grabbed, in some cases back to the hands of landlords, justified in the name of investments and projects in infrastructure, tourism, large plantations, dams, mining projects, and other large-scale development projects. At the core of the problem is corporate power and corporate capture of policies, which have tilted the discourse away from land as a social justice and human rights issue to land viewed from the lens of economic efficiency and maximizing revenues. Focus has documented, for example, that between 1996 and 2020, the government has reclassified and approved the conversion of agricultural lands to other non-agricultural uses like resorts and residences and industrial and commercial areas. Ancestral domains of IPs, on the other hand, are prime targets for large-scale mining and plantation projects. The increasing pressure on agrarian and indigenous lands from large-scale investment projects have also made these areas militarized and human rights hotspots. Not only have these land grabs dispossessed communities from their lands, communities standing up to resist the corporate takeover have been threatened, harassed, and killed. The attacks against land and environmental defenders is sadly a global phenomenon. Special Rapporteur on the Situation of Human Rights Defenders, Mary Lawlor's latest report, which looks specifically on the situation of human rights defenders working in isolated, remote, and rural contexts, cited the killings of hundreds of land and environmental defenders, with many of those killed being indigenous people's rights defenders. Concentration of land in the hands of powerful corporations have not only economic, social, environmental consequences for poor and marginalized communities, but pose a huge threat to their human rights as well. Echoing the report, one solution therefore lies in ensuring greater corporate accountability. Focus is part of the global campaign pushing for the legally binding instrument to regulate the operations of TNCs and make them accountable for human rights violations. Key elements of the proposed binding treaty that we can highlight here are: number one, the assertion of the primacy of human rights law over economic activities and trade and investment agreements, as well as giving affected communities the opportunity to seek redress and remedy from harm. Another important element is ensuring that joint and several liability is established along the value chain, ensuring that each and all parties can be held individually responsible for the entire obligation or a portion of it. In the case of mining projects in the Philippines, for example, not just the local mining company should be responsible, but likewise the companies that it supplies raw materials to. In other words, the subsidiaries, but also the mother company must be included. And then finally, another important provision is the one recognizing and promoting the rights of affected persons and communities. A big part of this is the right afforded to indigenous peoples on free, prior, and informed consent. The LBI campaign is one effort to put in place stronger human rights obligations on corporations to help temper their growing power and influence. There are also other instruments that we can consider as enablers of corporate power that must also be challenged. The trade and investment policy environment, which includes comprehensive and ambitious free trade and investment agreements, further entrench the corporate bias in policies and corporate control over, among other things, critical minerals, for example. These ambitious agreements that are being negotiated by governments have far-reaching impacts on farmers' rights, agricultural policies, restricting the ability of governments to protect agriculture, particularly peasant agriculture, on the one hand, and on the other hand, enabling greater power of corporations, including giving corporations the power to sue governments. These agreements must be seriously scrutinized and resisted by governments and the people as instruments of corporate concentration of power. I will stop here, wishing you all a productive discussion leading to clearer strategies on how we advance our call for redistributive policies and the stronger assertion of people's rights. Thank you.